Hello there, and welcome to A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. And as you can see, I have the Hydra shirt on, which can only mean it's another MCU retrospective as I continue to work my way through the cinematic universe that has defined the last decade plus. And we, of course, reach the end of Phase 2. This is the point at which Marvel, for some unexplained reason, started to end their phases, not with the big climactic movie like they did with the first phase, with the Avengers, but with almost like a epilogue movie. So Phase 2 ends with Ant-Man, Phase 3 ends with Spider-Man Far From Home. It's an odd choice, but I can also kind of see why they wouldn't want to kick off a new phase with what you might call the palette cleanser film. And the funny thing about Ant-Man, I remember at the time really, really dreading it. Amongst the slate of MCU films, it was the one at the time that I absolutely had no real interest in, and it only diminished because, of course, famously, it was originally going to be directed by Edgar Wright of the Cornetto trilogy fame. And he had been with that in development for years. I mean, it was before really the MCU had taken shape that he had been attached to it and had been working on the script and had finally developed it ready to take into production. But that was also the point in which the MCU blew up, and all of a sudden they didn't want just an Ant-Man film, they wanted an MCU Ant-Man film. And as far as you can tell, as far as we know, Edgar Wright's Ant-Man film wasn't supposed to be in the MCU. It was supposed to be something more within his style of comedy and action. And so he left the project. Now that was a huge blow. Additionally, I don't know, I've never really found the Ant-Man concept that interesting to me. The fact that it's the second Ant-Man Scott Lang, that Hank Pym is played by, of course, Michael Douglas, but he's more of an advisory role. And it felt like Marvel were making a lot of compromises to try and get a film together that I just wasn't 100% sure about. Particularly with the fact that it was supposed to be a riff on the Heist film. And as I've talked about in previous weeks, this was the experimental phase of Marvel, where they were really trying to pair up directors with films to try to create different feels. So, of course, I've talked extensively about the Russo brothers with Winter Soldier and the espionage feel, James Gunn with Guardians and creating that cosmic Star Wars-esque style, how Patty Jenkins was supposed to do Thor 2, didn't. A director whose name has completely gone out of my head did it, but he just wasn't the right fit. And of course Shane Black with Iron Man 3, which didn't work because his style is too left of field from the Marvel style and too subversive for the kinds of stories that we wanted to see as an audience. And of course Joss Whedon, who we burnt out essentially by the time of Age of Ultron, who was just overwhelmed by having to manage a franchise that he didn't really want to do a sequel with. And so you get to this and you're thinking, it's Peyton Reed, who is a perfectly reasonable director, but he's the second director on this. It's not really the strongest property, and even watching the trailer, you're watching going, okay, so I can tell that there's going to be like a heist vibe to it. It's going to be comedic, well, particularly comedic, even for an MCU film, but it just doesn't have the scale of, say, Age of Ultron or the cosmic machinations of Guardians, or have it really. It wants to also be its own film, where it's standalone. It very barely ties into the MCU. It has a really cracking opening scene with Howard Stark and Agent Carter, who and to establish this is MCU, but once you get into the film, it's doing its own thing. It barely calls back to the greater universe. It really wants to tell a very contained and small story. And so I get to this, and I remember not enjoying it. I remember going in with low expectations and just it living up to them insofar as there were things I really rubbed up against, and there were things that were I thought were interesting or okay, but the parts didn't make up the sum of the whole. And I was looking forward to Captain America: Civil War. I'd just come off Age of Ultron. I was not feeling this, like I say, palate cleanser film. Cut to near a decade later, and actually, watching this through this series now, it's really fun. It's a really fun film. It does have the things, and I'll very briefly talk about the things that don't work for it. But as a whole, it has a really light tone. I understand the frustrations that people have with the episodic nature of the MCU when they just want to go in and watch a film. And of course, the core principles of cinema mean that you should be able to go into a film and watch it with go in, go out, and that is all you require of a cinematic experience. And a lot of the MCU really veers off from that. It becomes episodes of a cinematic TV series, whereas this is a film. This is a cut and dry. We get introduced to Ant-Man, to Hank Pym, to Hope Van Dyne, to the supporting characters, to the world, to the stakes. We do the heist. We have the machinations and the double crosses and the twists, and then it ends, and it's fun and bouncy, and Peyton Reed directs it really well. And again, your lead cast, particularly your lead three of Paul. Oh, last name. Paul Rudd. Thank you. Sorry, Paul Rudd. I mean, Paul Rudd's a great comedic actor. He's been established for for more than a decade. So he just had this dry sense to him. And Evangeline Lilly again is a great foil to him, who takes the film that she's in deathly serious. And Michael Douglas beautifully bounces between the two different tones, where there are certain moments where he is the funniest character in the cast, and there are moments where you get the real darkness that the Hank Pym character has within both the comics and translated into the films. And so really the fact that it is a hodgepodge of different things put together doesn't mean it doesn't work. It actually flows together quite nicely. And it's funny because I misremember the film. The film, I remember thinking, okay, if this is a heist film, a proper heist film, which I've already previously spoken about how fussy I am about heist films and how they have to be doing something interesting to retain my interest. I remember going in thinking, oh, if this is mostly a heist film, that's great, that will please me, and coming out thinking barely was a heist film, it was a superhero film with a small heist scene. However, I'm completely wrong. It actually does make up more than 75% of the film. And, and it is about setting up the heist, setting up the players, working out the stakes, working out how to get there. And, frankly, that's pretty good in terms of the heist nature of it. It does drop it towards the end, especially into the third act. But up to that point, it really was a superhero take on a heist film. There are other things I misremember. I remember the family, Steve Lang's family, the daughter and the ex-wife and her husband, all being much more prominent in the film. But frankly, I mean, they do set up Cassie. They set up the fact that this is everything that he's fighting for. But they actually, they're barely in the film except for when they need to be. Particularly the ex-wife and her fiance. They play very background roles. They're there just to pad the environment out. And Michael Pena, I have to say, Michael Pena, he wasn't an actor I was aware of before, but really he does. He elevates the comedic aspect of this film in a way that's just brilliant. And the sequences where he's trying to describe a story, to explain context for why he knows something, is genuinely some of the best bits in the film. And him and his crew, when they're brought into the greater film, they do make a brilliant additional comedy foil to the established team. It really does come together fantastically well. The film, the issues I have with the film relate to a lot of the same issues that I've talked about endlessly in the last couple of videos, particularly, which are the two big problems that Marvel had at this period were the third act and the villain. The third act for this does devolve into the big issue that Marvel has all the way back from Iron Man 1, which is your character in his suit or with his powers or whatever context fighting the villain who has a similar or the same suit and powers, and particularly with, say, Iron Man or this, or I will talk about Black Panther when it does do that, in the coming videos. But when it's two CG guys fighting each other and they have very similar powers, it lacks weight, it lacks scale, it doesn't feel like people fighting, it just feels like a video game. The one credit I will give it, the stuff with the train is very good. I have to say, the set pieces involving the way that they shrink and re-enlarge the train and the fight themselves has moments to it, but when they're actually fighting, it's not the interesting part of the film. I wish this wasn't even a fighting film. I wish this was the first Marvel superhero film that has no fighting. It's actually just a heist film, but that's possibly a little bit outside of what would be accepted for a Marvel film. And the villain really ties into that, which again, the same problem with Malekith and with 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 various Mandarins from Iron Man 3, and it's the fact that the villain in this, it's very dull businessman who's slightly psychotic, and then he slowly unveils more psychosis as over the course of the film, to the point where you go, oh, okay, this guy it goes from, oh, he's possibly a sociopath with slight murderous tendencies to, oh no, this guy is, he is completely out there, and he's just not a particularly interesting character. He's almost, and again, this is something that people level at the Ant-Man films, he's derivative of Iron Man villains. The Ant-Man structure, the style, and at its worst, at its weakest, has a tendency to mimic or repeat what had been done in Iron Man, and particularly, this villain isn't that much different from what we've so far seen in this series with the Iron Man villains. And so those things really do knock it down a peg. But it doesn't ruin the film. It's just unfortunate, because other than that, I was having a blast with it. And the villain isn't uninteresting. His relationship to Hank, again, his motivations are very simple. And spoilers for a third act, but at one point they also reveal that he's working with Hydra, even though in the continuity of the MCU at this point, Hydra essentially have been eradicated, and they're there purely to establish, oh, this guy is on the next level of villainy, and they're not characters. They are there just to go, oh, this guy's affiliated with Hydra in some way, therefore he must be top shelf evil, and it doesn't work, not at all. The effects are pretty good, the shrinking, the stuff with that, and like I said, it's not the thing I'm the most interested in, but I have to confess that, and I remember the trailer and the way that not the Ants trailer, which probably is my favourite trailer, but the one where it establishes his powers and what he can do. It is the selling point of the film. We've recently had trailers for the upcoming Marvel films, including the Eternals and Shang-Chi, and frankly, if we're going to talk about trailers, the big problem that they have is, whereas you look at the Guardians trailer, and it sold people a straight off. You have the Ant-Man trailer, and it establishes how interesting and cool the world is and how his powers work. The problem with, say, Shang-Chi and the Eternals, they're both like, okay, the martial arts in Shang-Chi is kind of interesting. The Eternals is a terrible trailer. Genuinely a terrible trailer for advertising what that is. And it just lacks the craftsmanship. Whereas this looks good, and when you watch the film and see the effects and see the stuff with the shrinking, again, the effects are very cool. But yeah, this was fun. If nothing else, it was a fun watch. And after all these years later, I can finally say I definitely would push this film further up my my rankings than I think I did at the time. I think I very badly treated this film or reacted to this film when I first saw it. But now we are very close to Civil War, and I'm very excited to talk about that because that is up there as one of the great Marvel films, the Avengers 2.5 as it's been called. So I look forward to that in the near future. Anyway, if you like this video, please hit the like button, comment below, and share the video because those all help me in the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell to get notifications of upcoming videos, and please do check out my back catalogue. There is almost 150 of them, so please do check some of those out. You can follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I'm always tweeting about movies and TV shows, and upload these videos. I share them once they're on YouTube. Thank you for joining me. Take care.